I'm Ken Whiting, and in this video we are talking about hammock versus tent camping. Now, for 35 years, I've been a tent camper, and most of those years, it never even crossed my mind to trade my tent for a hammock. I mean, why would I give up something that was so comfortable for something that was obviously going to be less comfortable?
That was a good sleep.
Well, it wasn't until about 4 years ago where I was on a multi-day trip with a friend of mine who brought a hammock, and he swore up and down that it was the most comfortable way to camp. I kind of dismissed him, but then I went on another trip with some other friends, Pete and Kevin from the River Kings YouTube channel, and they were using hammocks as well, and they couldn't believe that I'd never tried hammock camping. And so I decided at that point I needed to try hammock camping and see what it was all about. And so this year I did my first hammock camping trip. Here we go. I hope it's not a miserable night. I'm sure it won't be. And I enjoyed it so much that I did a second multi-day trip with a hammock. I'm ready for it now. And in the end, what I learned was that hammock camping and tent camping are both awesome. It's not about which is better. It's about which is more appropriate for the type of trip that you're on. The question is, when is the hammock a better choice, and when is the tent a better choice? And by talking about that, I'm also, for those people who have never hammock camped before, like myself a year ago, I'll give you some insights into how and why hammock camping is such a great way to camp. So let's dive right into it. And we're gonna start with talking about the benefits of each. Now, the benefits of tents: lots of room. They can accommodate a single person, a couple, or a family or group of people. They're also better for hanging out if the weather's bad or the bugs are bad. For example, when I'm on a sea kayaking trip, sometimes I'll be stuck on shore for the entire day, and a tent is a more comfortable space to hang out, especially if the bugs are bad. And another big benefit of a tent is that you can pretty much pitch it anywhere. Now, the advantages or the benefits of a hammock. Well, for one, they're smaller and lighter if that's an issue on your type of trip. Also, they're really cozy. They're cozy to sleep in. And something that a lot of people don't think about is that they're a lot easier to get into and out of. You simply swing your legs over the side and get out like you're getting out of bed, versus getting on your hands and knees and crawling and contorting to get into it or out of a tent. Now let's compare the sleep quality you get in a tent versus a hammock. Personally, I get great sleep quality in both the tent and the hammock. It was a surprise to me how well I slept in the hammock, especially because I do have some lower back issues to deal with. A big factor is the gear that you're using. When you're tent camping, you should have a nice, big, comfy sleeping pad or sleeping mattress. I now use 3-inch thick sleeping mattresses, and they're available in ultralight models, so it doesn't mean you need to bring this big bulky thing. They pack down to the size of a Nalgene bottle. I also would recommend using that same type of sleeping pad, or any sleeping pad for that matter, in a hammock. Not only is it more comfortable, but it also provides some insulation underneath you, because your sleeping bag is going to be compressed underneath you. It's not going to provide that much insulation. This is particularly important in the shoulder seasons or winter camping, when you need that insulation underneath you. Now let's talk about comfort. Well, both can be very comfortable, and both can be uncomfortable if you do them wrong. First and foremost, the flatter the surface you can pitch your tent on, the better. But there's very seldom a completely flat surface when you're in the backcountry. And so if you're not going to be on a flat surface, it's important that your head is at the higher point than your feet. If your head is lower than your feet, there's a good chance you could wake up with a headache. It's just not going to be as comfortable. Something else that I've found in tents is that if the surface is rounded, that might cause your back to arch during your sleep, and that can be very uncomfortable. For hammock camping, of course you need to make sure that the hammock is tight enough so that there's not too much bow in it. And lastly, in the off season or shoulder seasons or in the winter season, try a underquilt. That provides insulation from underneath the hammock. Now let's talk ease of setup. Well, both the tent and the hammock can be pretty easy to set up. The tent, you simply need to find a relatively flat piece of ground. A hammock, you need to find 2 trees that are spaced the right distance apart. Now, a quick tip for setting up either a hammock or a tent. If it's raining out, set up your tarp first and then set up the hammock or the tent underneath that tarp. The tent can then be moved once it's set up wherever you need it, but at least you've set it up in a dry space. Now, what about bug season? How do tents and hammocks deal with bugs? Well, both can deal with bugs great as long as you have the right tent or hammock. Obviously, you need a tent that has a mesh interior, and you need a hammock that has an integrated bug net. For me, tents are a little better in buggy conditions simply because you have better space to hang out if you need to escape the bugs completely. Now, what about rainy conditions? What's better, a tent or a hammock in rainy conditions? Well, both can be miserable, but both can also be fine. With tents, often campers will make a mistake once. They will pitch their tent in a depression, and during a heavy rain, the water will pool and the tent will get soaked. That's a mistake you make once. Now with hammocks, as long as you set up the hammock correctly and you have an appropriate tarp over the hammock, then hammocks are great in the rain. The only downside is that if you're stuck dealing with rain for an extended period of time, hammocks aren't as comfortable just to hang out in as tents can be. Better. So overall, there isn't a clear winner between hammocks and tents. I think hammock camping and tent camping are both awesome. I'll likely take a hammock most of the time if I know the camp spots are going to have appropriate trees for setting up the hammock, because I find the hammock comfortable to sleep in, and I really like avoiding being on my hands and knees as much as you have to be in a tent. Either way, I think my biggest regret is that it took me so long to actually try hammock camping. I just dismissed it for way too long, and I hope you don't make the same mistake. Give it a shot. You might actually find a new favorite way to camp. If nothing else, you'll have tried something new and learned something from it. In fact, I'm going to leave links in the description box down below to some of my backcountry adventures with tents and with hammocks. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. Stay tuned for lots more tips, gear reviews, and backcountry adventures.